SL Tonight presents Western Trail Campfire Tales. Pull up a seat by the fire. Tonight we got tales from the old range, the kind they used to tell when the coffee was strong and the night was long. First up, Desert Drama by Roy L. Smith. When the wind died down, the four men dug themselves out of the sand. Wearily, young Jack Mitchell brushed at his eyes with awkward, manacled hands. Suddenly, Bart Dawson, the fat saloon-keeper, shouted, "The horses! They've broken loose!" Jack whirled with the sheriff and the gambler. He stared with the others across the desert where nothing moved between him and the distant purpled mountains. He had staved the sound in the cactus and the heat waves that danced above the barren waste. The inscrutable desert had served up another mystery. Their horses and had vanished with the storm. Bart Dawson, Vic Forrock, the gambler, and Sheriff Chuck Thompson stood rooted, mouths agape. But Mitchell was struck with a sense of fleeting irony. His laughter cracked in dread silence. "So you ran me down," he jibbed. "Now how will you take me in?" Forrock licked parched lips. "You fool," he hissed. "Didn't you realize our water was on those horses?" Dawson turned on the sheriff in sudden fury. "You said you knew the desert," he snarled. "Why, you clabber-mouthed idiot!" Fat hand hovered near the sheath gun at his hip, but he dropped it at the sheriff's hard stare. "We didn't ask to be deputized," he went on. "Now look, it was your interest to bring Mitchell in," Thompson retorted. "It was your gambling game he held up, and Farrak's your houseman. And a crooked one," Jack put in bitterly. "Everybody knows that, Sheriff. I'm telling you again, they cheated me out of—" "You're a liar," Dawson interrupted. "Enough of this bickering," thundered the sheriff. "We're faced with death. We gotta decide what to do." Hopelessness descended over Jack Mitchell. It didn't matter much to him, he thought. It was as well to die of thirst in the desert as to rot in a cell. Bart Dawson strode to the lone canteen which lay between the four of them. He picked it up and shook it, his green eyes cold and narrow. A piddling half-full canteen to last four men halfway across the Mojave, he muttered as if to himself. One man might make it, but not four. "Let's face it," Dawson said quietly. "We're 60 miles from nowhere. If we move on together, we may all die of thirst. If one man had that canteen, he could save himself at least. The question is, which man?" There was a silence, long and pregnant. Finally the gambler spoke, his dark gaze fixed glitteringly on the sheriff. "Who's to decide that? You?" Dawson shook his head slowly. "I got an idea. Are you carrying a pack of cards?" Farrak nodded. "Are you willing to deal 4 hands of showdown poker with—" Sheriff paused, then went on resolutely. "With the best hand taking the canteen?" A gleam appeared momentarily in the gambler's eyes, then disappeared. "I'm willing," he agreed. "Why should he deal poker hands?" Dawson asked quickly. "Why can't we cut?" "Any reason why Farrak shouldn't deal?" Thompson queried. Dawson returned the sheriff's stare and said, "Of course not, but only 3 hands. I say Mitchell's out." Jack clenched his hands. Anger and fear struggled his mastery within him. He tensed his muscles to spring at the saloon-keeper, but stopped at the sheriff's frown. "Mitchell draws a hand," Thompson said, laying his hand on the gun butt. Jack filled his lungs slowly. "Thanks," he said huskily. "Thompson, I'd like to feel you do what you could for my Clara and kid in case I was aiming to send for them later if I made it across." The sheriff nodded silently. "I was a fool to gamble away our stake," the prisoner went on, "but I swear I only took back what was rightfully ours. They cheated me out of it." "Deal the cards," the snarled. Farrak dealt rapidly, 3 cards around and no pair in sight. Dawson showed king high and the sheriff a queen. Mitchell and the gambler both had 7s tops. On the 4th round, the sheriff drew a second queen. Dawson had king jack and the gambler used 1/8. Mitchell closed his eyes for a moment, swallowed hard. He was out. The most he could draw now was a pair of 10s. Farrak dealt on, but more slowly. When Dawson's card fell, he sucked in his breath. It was the second king. The saloon-keeper was breathing hard as Thompson drew a 4. No hope for the queen. Then Farouk turned up his own last card. It was an ace. "Pair of aces, gentlemen," he crooned. "Looks like the water's mine." An oath burst from Dawson as the gambler reached for the canteen. "No, you don't," he shouted. "You four-flusher. You think I know those cards are marked?" He moved swiftly. Instinctively, Jack Mitchell threw himself forward, his manacled arms outthrust. The sheriff yelled a warning, but it was lost in the roar of Dawson's gun. Farouk took lead as the saloon keeper jerked himself sideways, avoiding Mitchell's plunging fists. Mitchell fell cheek downward in the sand. In the next instant, Dawson was on his feet, 45 menacing the sheriff, who had his own weapon half drawn. "Up with him," Dawson ordered. "This is a case where might makes right, friends." He stepped carefully towards Thompson, removed his gun as well as Mitchell's, which the sheriff had been carrying. Then he approached the gambler's prone body and picked up the canteen which lay beside it. Jack sat up in the sand, cursing. Then the hopelessness came again, and he drooped in sullen silence. "Murder's an ugly word," Dawson said. Dawson's laugh was harsh. "He's not dead," he returned, indicating the gambler's form. "Not that I give a hang." He laughed mockingly. "Adios, friends. I'm striking out for new pastures. I leave you my saloon that Mitchell about paid for. I'll always wonder if you'd get back to it." Carrying the canteen and guns, Dawson plodded away towards the west, his figure silhouetted, bulky and black against the setting sun. "You got in my way," the sheriff muttered to Jack while he stared after Dawson. "I didn't plan it this way exactly." Still, the slug only glanced off Farouk's skull and stunned him. "We'd better bring him around and get moving." "Yeah, as long as we're able," Jack added. He shoved out his wrist. "What about these? At least now you know I wasn't lying. They were running a skin game." "I suspected that for some time, but never could prove it," Thompson remarked as he removed the manacles. "Technically, I guess you still hold up the saloon, but who's to bring charges now?" Jack watched in amazement as the sheriff dug with his hands in the sand. A thrill shot through him as a half-dozen canteens emerged. You buried them on purpose?" he cried. "And why you turn the horses loose?" Thompson glanced in the direction Dawson had walked and turned to view. "There's a water hole 7 or 8 miles that way," he said. "I reckon we'll find the horses there. If not, we can walk to town. Let's call this little sand justice, Jack." "Sand justice," Mitchell echoed, and laughed aloud as the sweetness of life came pouring through him. "Sheriff, have you ever noticed how beautiful the desert can be?" Moving on. The Picture of Innocence by John Stark. Firehair's doe-skin moccasin signaled Devil Eye to quicken his pace. He didn't want to miss the driver of the chuck wagon to prove his skill in getting his team across one of the most difficult passes on Raven's Nest Cliff. The turn was over 30 feet ahead and on the other side of the creek, so there was no chance of being in the driver's path. Getting a nervous team and a loaded wagon maneuvered over this stretch of road took an experienced hand who knew his horses. "Now, Devil Eye, watch. Let us see how clever your brothers are, eh? I have never seen that wagon before. Its ranch brand is covered with road dust. I wonder who the driver is." Firehair patted her mount, twitching flank. The horse seemed to share his mistress's interest and pawed the ground in anticipation. The wheels were just completing the turn when it happened. A crack of rifle fire split the air, and in the next instant the wagon lurched over the side of the bluff, dragging the team along with it. The horses neighed in terror, their strong legs swaying the air before they were lost in a huge bank of dust and sand. For an instant, Firechair sat stunned, but only for an instant. "Get to him, Devil Eye. Over the creek is the fastest way. He may still be alive." In spite of her words, Firehair doubted that any person could survive such a plunge. He was right. Blankets were strewn about, small cases of medicine were split open, kitchen gear sprawled between broken wheels, and in the center of the debris, a still figure gazed at the sky with disbelieving eyes. Obviously, he'd been shot and killed before his wagon crashed 50 feet. One of the horses was fatally injured, and instinctively Firehair stooped and picked up the dead man's rifle to put the creature out of pain. She despaired that Devil Eye could witness her act, but first things came first. The animal was screaming in agony. She brought the gun to her shoulder, and a second bullet came from some unseen enemy. This one was directed at her. She fell to the ground and pressed her face into the dust. For a moment she'd be safe. It wouldn't be easy to pick her out as a target amidst the clutter about her. Devil Eye knew the sound that brought death and whinnied in fear. Out of the way, foolish one, before a bullet finds your heart. Get behind the cliff and I will crawl to you. That's the only way we can escape this mysterious killer. Devil Eye obeyed, and Firehair started the dangerous task of joining him. In her hand, she still clutched the dead man's rifle, for if she reached the sanctuary of the cliffside, she could yet get the chance of killing the horse who lay panting by the master's side. She reached at anything to pull herself along, expecting at any moment to feel the sting of death through her back. Suddenly, her hand felt the iron strongbox that bore the letter, Pay Roll. So this was the reason for the killing. Making a quick decision that she let go of the rifle and clutching the box instead, she had less than 5 feet more to crawl to safety, and by now she had an advantage. The broken wagon side hid her from view. The rest would be easy. She could flee this place and bring her find and news to old Tahama. Within minutes, Firehair was speeding back to her village along the river trail. There was no sign of anyone following her, but the iron box jammed into her saddlebag was the bait that would keep Death riding by her side until the bandit was discovered. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. "Oh, sister, I thought you wouldn't race your mount in the heat." It was Little Axe. He was curled up in his canoe, more interested in dozing than fishing. Devil Eye seemed to relax at the sound of the voice he knew. Firehair lost no time in telling Little Axe of her experience. "This could bring trouble on our tribe, sister. Strangers could reason that you were the killer. Have you not the box of money? You should not have taken it." Firehair's eyes blazed. "No! That's what the bandit wanted. You have given me a plan with your chatter. Here, you hold the iron box. I will ride to the sheriff and tell him all." Little Axe was still protesting as the girl leaped to her horse and galloped off towards the valley where the sheriff maintained his 2 quarters. The moon would cross the hills before she reached her destination. If you had asked for an escort instead of sending your money out in a chuck wagon, all this wouldn't have happened, Mr. Blaine. These words came from the sheriff, and they were loud and clear. Firehair nestled into the shadows outside of his cabin and listened. "I realized that too late. I was only trying to keep the lone bandit from getting my payroll like he'd been nabbing those other ranchers. I thought Jim Doyle, my driver, was the only one who knew that part of the cargo was that cash. That must be the rancher who owns the iron box," Firehair thought, moving closer, hoping to see their faces as the sheriff spoke again. "By the way, those snapshots of Firehair, isn't it unusual for a cowpuncher to sit around with a camera on his saddle?" "Maybe," came the third voice. "I'm new with Mr. Blaine, but he don't object to our hobby. Chuck wagon making that bend is a nice picture. I was going to snap it, but I wasn't expecting that engine winch. It was just plumb lucky to get the picture of her standing over Jim with the rifle and sneaking off with the payroll. I rode back and developed for myself to show Mr. Blaine." Firehair had to struggle to hold her temper. So that was it. That's why he wasn't after me with his bullet. When the first shot missed, he used his camera instead. The killer spoke again. "The boys are burned up about that winch killing Jim and the engine stealing their pay. They're riding to the settlement to get it back. I'm going with them." Firehair had heard enough. Not only was she being blamed for another's crime, but her people were in for trouble. When the door of the sheriff's cabin opened and the lanky figure of a cowpuncher stepped out, she hissed the signal. His hand went to his gun as he peered into the darkness. "You! What do you want?" "Shh! Away from the door! They will hear." Followed her invitation immediately, but kept his gun aimed at her heart. "What did you do with that box?" Firehair kept his eyes leveled on the muzzle of the weapon and spoke quickly. "In my village, there's a youth named Little Axe. He has the iron box. I don't savvy your game. Is the box empty? Maybe this is a trap. Do you want the box? Go." "We'll both go." Silent figures walked to their horses. Firehair made a motion with her head that they would travel west. With the killer's rifle aimed at her back, the girl led the way. "Perhaps I have done this wrong," Firehair thought. "I have endangered Little Axe, though only to save the rest of my tribe. The Devil Eye has forgotten the tricks I taught him long ago," tapped the message against her mount's flank. Suddenly the horse responded. He raised himself off the ground and snorted wildly. His action was so unexpected, the killer's horse shied and tugged at his rein. This was the moment Firehair wanted. The swung her mount around, and the animal charged off into the brush with a burst of speed. There was no time to lose now. He had to round up the sheriff and the rancher. He had to beg them to see her plan through. Why not, Blaine? In any event, we got her. If she says she'll lead us to the cash box, let's go. We're armed, and she's not. They were too late. Little Axe lay crumpled on the ground. An ugly gash creased his brow, and the box was gone. Firehair wanted to cry out for what she had done, but there was a sound in the brush that made her raise her hand for the two men to hold their animals and remain where they were. She slipped from Devil Eye and stepped forward in the direction of the noise. Not knowing what the girl's intentions were, the sheriff raised his gun. Blaine held him back. She's engine trained. She hears something. There's more to this than we can figure out. Give her a chance. It didn't take long to find it. He was clawing at the base of a dead oak with a penknife. But suddenly, as though sensing rather than seeing, he whirled about. Stand back! Kids say it's in here. If you move, I'll blow your head off. And if the money's gone from that box, you'll get worse. They're under too much trouble to mess things up now. Even to using a camera. Shut up, Lynch. The camera was a good excuse for me to be a lot of places that would take explaining otherwise. You did look guilty. You look more guilty right now, partner. The sheriff's voice was cold and meaningful. His gun was no longer trained on the girl. Firehair rushed the Little Axe, who was struggling to sit up. Will you ever forgive me, little friend? He didn't get the box. Ha! Your killer was not the clever fox we thought, sister. I told him the wild cherry tree, but he went to the dead oak. And for reasons that probably only members of the Dakota tribe could understand, the two friends broke out in loud laughter. And that's the last Ember for tonight. 2 more stories from Western Trail. Fire's dying down, but the trail goes on. Until next time, this has been Western Trail Campfire Tales for myself tonight. Ride safe. Good night.